What's up, non-believers, doubters, and skeptics? Welcome back to Jesus Unfollower, the podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Crow, and today's episode is brought to you by JesusUnfollower.com. That's right, my own goddamn website. If you go to JesusUnfollower.com, you can sign up for Unfollowers Digest, which is a weekly newsletter that I send out every Sunday. Now on to the podcast. What is up? What is up? How you guys doing today? I'm doing pretty fucking well considering the world. I feel like that's like my go-to phrase now. I'm doing pretty well considering that the world's a fucking shithole, but it's kind of the truth. Just sitting here in the living room, hanging out with Comet, drinking a bubbly water. I know what you're thinking. Bubbly water? Aren't those tasteless? Yeah, I used to think so too, but they're actually pretty good. My taste buds have evolved. I'm trying to drink less soda and shit that's not quite as good for me, so on to the bubbly. But you know what's even better than bubbly is this new AHA water. Blueberry pomegranate. Just try it. You will thank me. I'm trying to get everyone to jump on the new sparkling water craze. That includes the new lady in my life. What? Kevin, did you just say that you have a new lady in your life? Yes, but it's top secret. It's come to my attention that many people do not understand the burden of proof. And that includes atheists, too. Atheism is not a claim. Atheism is simply a lack of belief in God. According to Wikipedia, the burden of proof is the obligation on a party in a dispute to provide sufficient warrant for their position. When two parties are in a discussion and one makes a claim that the other disputes, the one who makes the claim typically has a burden of proof to justify or substantiate that claim, especially when it challenges a perceived status quo. This is also stated in Hitchens' Razor, which declares that what may be asserted without evidence may be dismissed without evidence. I'm sure you've probably heard of Hitchens' Razor. Carl Sagan also said that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which is along those same lines, but true. I didn't think that I was just going to be reading straight off Wikipedia, but here we go. Shifting the burden of proof. One way in which one would attempt to shift the burden of proof is by committing the logical fallacy known as the argument from ignorance. It occurs when either a proposition is assumed to be true because it has not yet been proved false, or a proposition is assumed to be false because it has not yet been proven true. You guys know that I'm on TikTok these days, and it's actually a lot of fun, but there are some very ignorant people over there, and sometimes they are children, so I don't really respond to them, or I block them because I don't want to get into an argument with a kid. Really, anybody who's under 18, I'm not going to go back and forth with, because I remember what I was like at that age. Hard-headed, thought I knew everything, just blindly believed things that were told to me. So it's not really fair for me to jump on them and attack their point of view. But there are also a lot of people who are over 18, over 20, over 30, over 40, who are commenting on my stuff and making the same logical fallacies. Proves that God isn't true. That's not how the burden of proof works. The burden of proof is on the person making the claim. So if you're claiming that there's a God, then you have to prove that. Like it's not on me to disprove a God that I don't believe in anyways. I'll give you an example of one of the comments that I got on one of my recent videos over there. It says, this is from X-Ray Grace, is this user, which might be one of the hardest-headed people that I've ever come in contact with on any social media. They said, atheism, a faith position that adamantly demands perfect evidence from Christians but no evidence from itself. Turns out I was right. Take care. And I responded to that with, atheism is the opposite of a faith position. It is simply a lack of belief in God, and atheism asserts nothing about how the universe came to be. That's the common problem, is that people assume so many things about atheists that most of us believe in the Big Bang Theory, but all atheism means is that you don't believe in God. It doesn't assert anything else at all. So even some atheists are guilty of assuming things about other atheists. There's actually a guy in my Instagram comments who is an atheist, but he's calling out me and other atheists who are just saying that atheism is just a lack of belief. He says there are multiple systems of science that disprove the necessity for an intelligent designer. That is what atheists base their argument on against God. And he says, yes, atheism is a lack of faith because it uses science to support the logic behind having a lack of faith in a designer. To say it doesn't require evidence is stupid. I'm atheist because the evidence against a designer. I see what he's trying to say. And yes, if you're trying to convince someone else to be an atheist, then it probably helps, yes, to use science and to say, hey, this is why I believe this. But just to be an atheist, just to call yourself an atheist, you don't owe anybody any explanation. Let's just say the majority of the world believed in unicorns and cultures shaped their laws according to their belief in unicorns. But they had no evidence to support that a unicorn is real, then I would call myself an AUcornist. The only reason I label myself an atheist is because theists are so prominent and they create laws based on their belief in a God that I don't have any evidence for. Being an atheist is a reaction, a response. I know it can be a little bit confusing because people say that atheism is a belief that there are no gods. That's really not true. Some atheists do hold that position. They're considered strong atheists because they say there are no gods. But really that's the minority of atheists. Most atheists say, I don't believe in God, but I'm open to believing in one if there is evidence presented. And right now there's just not. A good analogy about the burden of proof is Russell's teapot. And you've probably heard this if you're an atheist, or maybe you haven't, but it's an analogy formulated by Bertrand Russell to illustrate that the philosophic burden of proof lies upon a person making unfalsifiable claims, rather than shifting the burden to others. I'm reading from Wikipedia again. Bertrand Russell specifically applied his analogy in the context of religion. He wrote that if he were to assert, without offering proof, that a teapot, too small to be seen by telescopes, orbits the sun somewhere in space between the Earth and Mars, he could not expect anyone to believe him solely because his assertion could not be proven wrong. So think about how absurd that is. If he were to say, hey, there's a teapot in orbit that's too small to be seen by telescopes, but it's there, you have to trust me that it's there. You can't prove that it's not there. That's the same as when someone tries to tell an atheist that they can't prove that God doesn't exist. Don't ever if you're in some sort of argument with a theist, don't let them off the hook. Don't let them shift the burden of proof. It is on them. It is not on us to prove that a God does not exist. That's absurd. In the same way that they so easily dismiss other gods, basically every other god. If we're talking about Christians, they easily dismiss every other god who's ever lived or been created or been worshipped. But they don't apply that same standard to their own God. And they expect us to debunk their God, to disprove their God, when they are not responsible for doing that when they're talking about how other gods don't exist. If that makes any sense. Think about it in terms of in a courtroom. If you have the prosecutor and you have the defendant, isn't the burden of proof on the prosecutor to prove that the defendant is guilty? Don't they have to provide evidence? Or would the judge be like, well, there's no evidence that he did it, but there's also no evidence that he didn't do it, so he must have done it. It's just not the way it works. The burden of proof is on the person who is making the claim, which in that case would be the prosecutor. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate it. As always, it means the world to me. If you would, go to JesusUnfollower.com and sign up for the newsletter. I'll send out updates on the podcast along with Unfollowers Digest every Sunday morning. If you like the show and you want to support me, go to patreon.com/JesusUnfollower. You can get episodes a week early. And until next time, let logic and reason guide the way. Peace out.